as far as like what makes up the foundation of your political beliefs, but I guess also just beliefs in general. Like I want to get an idea of like could be principles, like foundational beliefs, influences, experience that you guys had. Like why do you believe what you believe? I guess we could start. We'll start with quickly.
All right, yeah. Um, so I would kind of just go to being a constitutionalist more than anything. Like I vote conservative typically, but I'm really not a conservative because I don't love all the beliefs of the party. They just align more with what a constitutionalist is, in my opinion. Um, so a constitutionalist like would be kind of if it doesn't say we can do it in the Constitution, I don't think we should be able to do it for any extended period of time. So, like, the Constitution allows the federal government to make big decisions for short periods of time, but for long periods of time, they're supposed to be very restricted.
Okay.
And that's kind of where I'm at in most of my political beliefs. Um, yeah, I would say that's really the basis of where they come. I'm a constitutionalist, conservative,
Okay.
but
And
but that leads to very libertarian beliefs in terms of like the way state like it should be run in the federal government. So I think the states should really be controlling most of what's going on.
would you call yourself a libertarian?
I'd say I lean more into the libertarian side than anything else because but I end up voting conservative because there's specific issues that like they land on that I just can't go against.
Gotcha. And would you just give like a quick definition of what exactly is a libertarian?
Yeah, libertarian would be like you believe in extremely small government, very hands off. So, like the initial foundation of the United States, the Articles of Confederation, that would be extremely libertarian,
Mhm.
like over the top libertarian. So, I believe like we should really have extremely small government at the federal level because the feds tend to be less focused on the people, and we should have much larger government handling the state and local levels because they're more focused on what their individual people need.
Gotcha. So ultimately, just to, if I could like somewhat make sure I'm understanding here, you would look at it and say that like the founding fathers knew what they were talking about when they wrote up the Constitution. It's been holding up this long, and ultimately, like you would defer to the Constitution at all times for if it's
At a
if
federal
yeah,
level, yeah, I would always defer to the Constitution.
and then also a piece of that, another piece of that being that you want to see more power to the states and as small of a federal government as is possible to run the country effectively.
Yes,
Gotcha.
pretty much. At a federal level, I tend to be more libertarian. At a state level, I tend to be more on like the you need a bigger government
Mhm.
to run a country like this. So like you can't be libertarian all the way on a state level,
Gotcha.
but like definitely on the Fed level, you can't have too much government.
Okay.
I think that's most of the issues we're seeing.
Gotcha. And then Brett, also, I just want to like say, like, I encourage you guys, if you guys have questions for each other, like, I don't have to be the one asking all the questions. If there's anything you want to clarify or understand better, I know you guys have also like had a lot of these conversations already, so you probably understand each other pretty well already. But just want to like throw that out there.
Somewhat. Somewhat. I think I talked to Quigley's parents more than I've talked to his about this.
Are your
Yeah,
parents in a similar camp as you?
My parents are a little bit harder on like the right wing beliefs than I am,
Okay.
but I think that's like with any generation where like even if you're conservative in our generation, you tend to not be as conservative as your parents are.
Right. It does seem to me that the older generations seem to like fit into the boxes a little bit more in my
Yes,
experience.
absolutely.
They seem to either be like fully Republican, fully Democrat, whereas a lot of people, not everyone, certainly not everyone, but a lot of people that I talk to our age have a little bit more of like nuanced perspective and don't really fit one side or the other.
Yeah, I was just saying that before we started this with my mom.
Yeah.
Like I was saying, like I'm not necessarily conservative, but like I'm probably one of the better people to ask like of like who we know to do like a conservative perspective.
Right. All right. So Brett, how about you?
I mean, I mean, if we're talking about parties, I consider myself a Democrat. Um, but where I really got my beliefs from is how I grew up, right? Um, I mean, both my parents, my families, um, are Democrats, and actually a big chunk of my family outside of my internal family, the five of us, are Republicans. There's a lot of back and forth we go, but it's kind of just what you hear and through your real life experiences, right? You kind of learn for yourself, and that I lean this way socially, or I lean this way fiscally, or I lean a certain way, right? I think it's different for everybody. Um, and so I kind of lean towards Democrats and just what I believe, right? And it kind of just comes naturally to me. It's just I know I can listen to other people's arguments, I can hear what they have to say, but other than that, that's really what it is.
Gotcha. All right, cool. Um, so I heard this said recently, and I thought it rang very true, at least in my opinion, that the main political divide today is less about Democrat versus Republican and more about trust in institutions versus lack of trust in institutions. And I think it seems to me that in this day and age, people who don't really trust in institutions tend to lean a little bit more right. People that do tend to lean a little bit more left. I want to get like, first of all, do you guys agree with that statement that that is seems to be the more clear divide? And then which side of that would you say that you fall on? And when I say institutions, I mean like government, media, like big tech and pharma companies, like colleges and universities, kind of like all
Mhm.
those like who are supposed like to have the credentials and they're supposed to be the voices of authority that you can trust. Well, let's go, Brett. We'll alternate who goes first.
Sure. I mean, I would agree with that statement somewhat, right? I don't think it's definitely 100% 50-50. Republicans don't trust anybody. Democrats do trust people. I don't think there's a lot to really go after in terms of what agencies tell us. Um, I also don't see a reason why they would want to lie to us. And I don't think it goes as deep as some people feel, right? I don't think there's reasons that, the Department of Health would lie to us on certain numbers, right? What's there to lie about? Um, I don't think there's reason for governments, unless you're working for the CIA, to lie to us, right? You see, you see a situation like Signalgate, where we leak our attack plans or military plans or whatever, and then you have whoever's in power lying
Yeah.
about it, right? So that's a situation. If we could discuss that a little bit. That's where I kind of lean. Well, really, what is it? So
Gotcha. And sorry, wait. When you said something about you don't see any reason to lie unless you work for the CIA, is what you mean by that? Like, you have
what I
sensitive
mean by
information to protect.
what I mean, yeah, correct.
Okay.
What's classified, what isn't classified, right?
Mhm.
And and what is the definition of classified in some cases, right?
Hmm.
Because it sounds like sometimes, well, we can classify anything we want to, really. But I would consider some things that was probably classified, and they might just be like telling us it's not classified. Um, but overall, I don't think you know we're being lied to, as much as some people might feel.
Gotcha. So as far as like, well, I'll stay on you for a minute here and just elaborate on like as far as corruption in government. Do you think do you think we have a corrupt government in the United States?
No, I don't think we have a corrupt government. I think our government can work more efficiently in different spots, right? I think our government can be more transparent. I think the people who represent who represent us could be more transparent. But I don't think it's corrupt. I think we all have the same goal in mind. It's to you know stay at the top of the world, essentially being the number one country in the world and the leader of the free world. Um, so I think there's ways to go about it. And politics today has gotten to a point where it's just like hypocrisy after hypocrisy, lies, and for both sides. So we'll see where it goes. But
Gotcha. Cool. How about you, Quakes?
So I would definitely agree with like the whole proposition of that Republicans tend to fall more on like the less trusting side, Democrats tend to fall on the more trusting side. Like as like a general statement,
Hmm.
like Brett said, there's definitely nuance to that, but generally yes. Um, I do tend to have less trust in our government. Uh, like I don't know if I believe there's a organized corruption to the extent of like a deep state. I don't. There's like not really enough evidence to prove something like that at this time. It could be there, it could not be there. Um, what I do think is that there's definitely a lot of individual corruption in terms of like what we just saw with the mayor in New York City. where he got arrested on these charges in terms of like something to do with money. I honestly didn't follow it too heavily. And then you had people saying Trump is now holding this over his head so that he is on the Trump administration side. Like that's clearly there's something going on there, regardless of if it's what we're being told.
Mm-hmm.
I think that happens on a lot of levels, like in terms of like Congress, like individual state congressmen and senators and stuff. Like we're not keeping track of all these people. There's definitely a lot of individual things going on, and it would be nice if we could clean that up. But like it's unrealistic in terms of power is going to corrupt people. So it's more so we should have better restrictions in place to watch these things and catch them before they happen. I do think that there's certain families who have a level of power within the country that allows them to pull strings in terms of like I think the Bidens, the Clintons, the Bushes, like all of them are friends the same way in Hollywood they're all friends. So the Obamas as well in that circle. So they all definitely pull strings after they leave office, that's also corruption to an extent. But then you get into the question of are they helping people or are they, dictating what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
So if they're just helping people, that's not corruption. If they're dictating what's going on, now we're talking about corruption. And that's where we get into it. Like, well, we need more transparency in the government. So these questions aren't even there.
Gotcha.
And if I could jump in, I mean, if we're talking about true corruption, the way I see it, and I think Democrats see it, is what quickly brought up the mayor of New York City, right? Mayor Adams. I mean, from the outside and from what we learned through multiple media outlets is Mayor Adams took bribes from the Turkish government,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, right, to whatever dollar amount, even if it was $1, it's too much. And then you have Trump win the election, and then you have him come to the mayor and go, hey, from what it seems, hey, help us, round up immigrants, let us use Rikers Island, and maybe we'll drop these charges, right? Because we have control of the judge, we have control of the prosecutors or the attorneys or whatever. And then he's like, okay. And then they go up here on morning shows, and he's like, there's no quid pro quo here. You have I forget what's his name. Maybe quickly you remember, but
the charges were dropped though, like a couple days ago, correct?
Recently, yeah.
Yeah, it was so like there's something happened there. Like there's corruption right there, and like it's like we need transparency on what occurred there, and it's pretty clear what happened, I think. But like it'd be nice if we could see documents and stuff that kind of show what actually happened.
If you want to know true corruption, I mean, even there are a lot of people in the city support him. I mean, Democrats. There's a lot of Democrats in the city that still support him. I mean, I think he should have been ousted. I think Kaji Hochul should have gotten rid of him immediately, but she was like, "We're waiting on more information." Well, I mean, we still will see what she says. She's the only one that essentially has the power to fire him, I guess you could say. But I mean, that was you always hear Republicans talk about like corruption, but true corruption that was a picture perfect moment from my perspective as a Democrat. Just like, why is this not being talked about? Well, you didn't really hear Trump supporters talk about it too much when it came to that because, well, it's because immigrants. We have to get immigrants out of our country. We have to, like we don't care how it happens. What, he took some money from, like, what did he actually do? But there's a way to go about things, and that's not the way to do it. So.
Gotcha.
Totally agree. That's definitely one of my biggest things is there's a way to do things, and that doing it through an improper channel only leads to more issues.
Gotcha. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So that I think is a good segue into talking about DOGE, because I do largely think that probably your opinion of DOGE largely correlates to your view of how corrupt and inefficient. I mean, I would lean towards more how corrupt is the government over inefficient. I think people that really support DOGE mostly, I'm going to guess, view that the government is more corrupt than people who do not support DOGE. But I want to first ask, forget DOGE as an organization. What is your opinion of Elon Musk? Because I also think that is largely going to indicate how you feel about DOGE, because you might feel that the overall task of DOGE is important, But if you don't trust Elon Musk and you don't think he's the guy for the job, then you're going to be very unhappy with how that's going. So let's start with just Elon Musk. Do you trust him? Like, what's your overall opinion of him? Start with you quickly.
Yeah, I've always kind of liked Elon. I've followed him far before like him in politics was even a concept.
Mm-hmm.
Say like 2013, 14 was the first time he kind of popped up on like anything that I knew about, like Instagram or whatever. Um, I think he's an overall like he's the typical philanthropist, rich guy, like looking to do like good for the world. But I think with science, a lot of times they don't know when to stop,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's the same concept. So currently, I don't think he's gone too far. Like I would rephrase that actually, because he's gone too far in some areas. I don't think he's done anything that's irreversible or has hurt the country to a point that like we can't fix it. But I think if we allow Elon to stay in his position too long, that's inevitably going to happen because Elon's brain works differently than the rest of ours. Elon thinks in efficiency and what's the best thing for like overall, and he doesn't think about an individual. So that would then like kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Push out like groups of people that don't fit into his view of an ideal society, which
Right.
that leads to bad things. So Elon is good in efficiency. Elon can like do things that are good for the world, but him being in a high position of power for too long could lead to bad things just because he has a different way of viewing the world.
Yeah, I feel like anybody, it doesn't matter who it is, he is in a position with quite an enormous amount of power at the moment, and no person should be in that position for too long.
Yeah, exactly. Now there is an end date on it, like July
Is
4th.
there?
I don't know if that can be changed, but currently the end date on him or DOGE in general is July 4th, 2026.
Okay. Huh.
That
I didn't
I
know that.
don't I don't know if that can be changed though.
Mm.
The way it's written, it kind of seems like they can't,
Okay.
but it's the federal government and they make their own rules, so like they can kind of do whatever the hell they want.
Well, I think he's
Gotcha.
considered a special government employee, something like that, right? Which
Yeah,
usually goes on for 100
he's
years.
under like some weird salary. Like his title is not like something that's going to be in every presidency is a way to put it.
Right.
Yeah.
So before we go to Brett, I want to ask like one essential question. Do you believe that Elon Musk like is who he says he is, wants what he says he wants, and is someone that we can take sort of at face value, or do you think that it's possible that he has ulterior motives for the things that he does?
I think Elon does good, but he's also a troll. So you can't take him at face value. Like he has absolutely in his past, before being in politics, done things just to screw with people, like just to be that guy.
Mm.
So I he shouldn't be doing that at a political level, but he's extremely intelligent, and it's possible he's just playing some crazy game of chess to screw with people. Also possible that sometimes he's doing some like saying some really crazy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that you can't take him at face value, but he does mean well in terms of like his actual actions in the world.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that is ultimately the crux of the point that I was trying to get to. So, Brett, what do you think?
I was fine with Elon when he stuck to Tesla and was all for clean energy and electric vehicles and all for that. And then all of a sudden, the tables sort of turn, and Elon acquires Twitter now, which he renamed to X, and starts, using it as a tool, I would say, to manipulate and influence certain elections. Um, I was fine with him before this, but ever since he acquired Twitter and started pushing towards and getting closer to Donald Trump, I'm sort of losing respect for him. And just the way he goes about things nowadays, I kind of feel like it's just he's only thinking about himself. I mean, there's a reason he dropped $275 million or whatever insane figure it was in the election. I think it's all about his personal interests, to be honest, and that's why you see all these protests right now. Get him out of here because that's all. Billionaires only want to make more money and continue their interests. Um, I think Elon has. I think there's plenty of reasons why Elon wants to stay close to Donald Trump, and one of it's because he has a bunch of government contracts that, well, I do this for Trump. Trump helps me with some things, right? He wants to go to Mars in the future. Um, Biden would have had certain, laws, legislation that may have made that harder. He wants to, I don't know, he wants free speech, and then when somebody disagrees with him on Twitter, he goes absolutely crazy, and he makes up lies about astronauts that are stuck at the ISS space station and attacks NASA, saying they had no plan. Attacks Biden, there's no plan. I had to come and save them when that's not true. Um, so I think it's hard to back him. To be honest, you see how much money he just put into the Wisconsin election. They lost there, but I mean, he has his interests alone in mind. I don't think he has the interests of the American people, and he just tries to scare people, saying if this doesn't happen, the world is going to end. Like we won't have a nation anymore, and it's just that's not true. So listen, like I said, I was all for him when he was making the world a better place. I don't see that the same way now. So we'll see how he goes. But
Gotcha. So you would say that Elon Musk has basically his own selfish interests and in mind, and I'm gonna jump to a conclusion and say that your concern with Doge would probably be that he's not just going to be making the government more efficient for everybody. He's going to be finding ways to make it more efficient for him.
yeah, in a way, listen, I don't have any problem with what Doge's idea is, right? Doge has the right idea. Reduce spending enough to slow down the economy. A slower economy means interest rates come down, and if things slow enough, the Fed reduces rates to juice the economy. Debt repayment gets cheaper, and then debt comes down with any growth you see, right? Um, Doge screwed it up trying to do everything at once with the narrative being like Dems would kill it. That's not really the right way to go about it. It also was trying to gut different agencies, which you can't do without the approval of Congress, right? It's kind of this. What I get frustrated with is him trying to do all these things, gain access to all these without permission. You just can't, it's not the way to be doing it. And the idea is that, well, we're never going to be allowed to do it, so we have to do it this way. But that's not true. Like I said, there's a way to do things. Doge is not doing it the right way. And like I said, Doge has the right idea. They're not doing it the right way.
Gotcha. So quickly, obviously you'll get to like respond to all that, but I want to ask specifically what you think about, because Brett was saying that basically, and you could correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but that like he really doesn't have the right to do some of the things that he's doing. Is that
I would absolutely agree with Brett's analysis of Doge there.
okay?
Like, that's exactly what I was going to say. Doge has the perfect idea. Like, it should be being done. Maybe there should be a little bit of a power reduction in terms of like how they're going about it. But that's, I think, where the problem ends up being is we gave too much power in it. So it allows him to do it in whatever way he thinks is best, not like what a group of people thinks is best, which is how our government is supposed to be run, whether it's on a large or a grand scale. And like Doge, I think the biggest example of it would be in Medicaid and Medicare. I mean, he screwed up hard there. He slashed it way too hard out of the gate, and like that was dumb. So if you were to do Doge over a period of time, and you were to take analysis of like specific people, specific areas, see what areas seem more like fraud than others. So for instance, I would say New York City, Chicago, and Houston are seeing a lot more fraud in Medicare and Medicaid than you're going to see in Missouri, Indiana, and Iowa as a state, right? So let's send people to these cities first, figure out the fraud there, get it under control, and have it ran efficiently there. And then you can move that out into rural areas extremely easily. But instead, they're going right out of the gate from the top, just hard at everything. And that is the dumbest way to do things. It's going to cut costs and look good on paper for the first year, but then the long-term effects of it are horrible. I think that's pretty much, I think, what you were saying as well. Like it looks good at first, and then it's going to hurt us long term.
We talk about, I know, on the topic of billionaires, but I mean, Mark Cuban had like the right narrative as well. He did say something, and he said Doge would be a good idea if like spanned across 24 months, right? Looking at long term, you're giving the nation a plan, time to plan and prepare for it, right? This idea to just come in and start cutting and cutting and cutting, it's just it's not the way to do it.
There should have been at least a 6-month plan phase, I would say. where they couldn't make action like for the first 6 months. I'm saying.
Mm,
Yeah.
gotcha. On DOGE, you guys want to say anything else, or you want to get into tariffs?
No, just stay away from our private data.
Right. So ultimately, you guys agree on DOGE that the basic idea of it is necessary and something we should be implementing, but the execution so far has been detrimental.
Yeah,
Abhorrent.
listen, and I don't think it's like that's a republic. I think a lot of Democrats would say, sure, let's help make the government more efficient, right? Who doesn't want that? But the way it's being done is what Democrats disagree with, um, and the threats to like Medicare and Medicaid are what Democrats disagree with, because that's not the way to go about it. You look at USA ID, right? Whether or not you agree with how much money we should be spending on certain countries and how much our influence should be around the world, um, just stopping everything should not be the way to do it immediately. That's not the way to go about it, and then push the narrative that like this is like what we're doing, and there's no reason for it. There's
Mm-hmm.
a reason for all of it, right? We don't want China to gain influence around the world. We don't want to be hidden in the shadows, right?
Mhm.
It's just not the way to do it. We've seen what history that has done in the past. History, repeats itself. We don't want China, and they're believe me, China's a real threat in terms of economic standings. Um, we don't want them to take over, that territory. We don't want them to be the ones, and then everybody starts looking at China. These low, very poverty-rich nations looking at China. Well, they're helping us, and then that's how they spread their influence. USAID has a purpose. It's not just money we're spending that could be used here. There's a reason for it. So that's how I feel about it.
Is there anything you want to add there quickly, or you good?
I agree with everything Brett said there.
Cool.
That's DOGE is one of the areas I tend to be a bit more like on the Democratic side for because they have not been executing it well. But I think it's an American belief, like Brett said, that we need more efficiency in our government, and that's clear to anybody that follows politics.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh God, what is doing my screen? Where am I here? Okay. So let's get into tariffs. Quigley, if you want to kick that off.
Yeah, so I agree with the tariffs again, but I think the implementation's not necessarily being done properly. I agree with tariff matching. So if a country's charging us a tariff and it's in a predatory fashion,
Mm-hmm.
meaning they're a wealthy country, then yeah, we should be matching that tariff. With that said, I'll use Madagascar as an example because I actually checked theirs right before the podcast just so I knew I had the numbers right to reference this as like something I didn't like.
Sure.
Trump recently posted, I don't know if you guys saw that chart of what we're charging in tariff and what like they're charging us.
No, I didn't see this.
So it was a BS chart. The percentages he posted were not tariffs were being charged, they're trade deficits.
Yeah.
And I just looked at the actual, what's it called? Like statement I guess he put out regarding the tariffs. And he's matching tariffs with trade, or he's using their trade deficit numbers to match with our tariffs, which is an unfair way of going about this. If you're going to do that, that's going to lead to countries like Madagascar, who I'm referencing, having, let's say, a 93% tariff against them. Now, currently it's at 47, but our trade deficit with Madagascar in 2023 was 86. He had 93 on his. The numbers I found were 86, so regardless, very high. We can't be charging a poor country like that kind of a tariff. And it shouldn't be based off trade deficit because trade deficit has nothing to do with if we're being charged tariffs or why we should be charging tariffs. Trade deficits, whether a country has what we need and what if we have what a country needs, like it wouldn't make sense it just doesn't make sense to charge tariffs there, in my opinion. What does make sense is tariffs that's existed since World War II that were built to help nations rebuild being matched by our country because there's no reason for us to currently be paying those tariffs when the purpose for putting them in was to help poorer nations like France after World War II. They needed that kind of money. They don't need that anymore. Most of Europe doesn't need it, frankly. So that's where I think we should be doing that. But I don't necessarily agree with the way he's going about them because he's doing it in a way that's to try to fix the entire economy. And they shouldn't be used to fix the economy. They should be used to fix the way that we're being charged outside of our nation.
Gotcha. So would you say that the way they're being used now is more about us getting an advantage, and the way that
I
they
would say,
should be used is like economic justice?
yes, I would say we're using them as a wolf in sheep's clothing type of thing, where we're being like, oh, well, this is us defending ourselves. In some cases, we're getting rid of a predatory tariff. But in other cases, we're using our policy in a predatory way towards a smaller country. And we're using the excuse of, well, we don't have time to figure it out right now, so we'll figure it out down the line, which is written in his plan. It's written that we're going to figure out, down the line, we're going to take a closer look at individual nations. But like, dude, how long can Madagascar or like, what other, just think of another poor nation. I don't need to keep naming them,
Mm-hmm.
but how long can they last with a 47 to 50% tariff against them from the United States?
Sure.
And like Brett was saying, that's pushing countries towards China and other trade partners that we don't necessarily want them.
Gotcha. So how do you feel, Brett?
I hate them. I think there's no reason for them at all. Um, the reciprocal, which they're really not reciprocal, or just a 10% flat tariff across the board. I mean, it's common knowledge. I mean, if you took a basic macro class, I mean, tariffs, increase consumer prices, inflation are inflationary, etc. To the extent on when we start seeing that, who's to know? Some say that we will see it right away. There are some companies out there, I can't name them off the top of my head, but they're in the news who just announced layoffs because of these tariffs. There's companies that are sending out emails saying, "Hey, we're reassessing the new implementation of these, of President Donald Trump's tariffs. We'll see in 6 months what prices will look like, etc." And I think one of his arguments is like, "Well, we want manufacturing back in America, right? We want to make things here. Everything should be made here." There's a reason everything's not made here. It's because everything would cost. An iPhone would cost $10,000. The prices would be through the roof. And to start going after our our allies, saying they're ripping us off, well, it goes back to doing things the right way and the wrong way. I mean, if you feel our allies are ripping us off, it is placing tariffs on them and starting a trade war is not the way to do it. You get them together and you say, we need you guys to start giving us more, giving us help, or start investing more in your military budget. It's not, you don't threaten them with tariffs and then force them to make a change in our favor. I mean, the tariffs against Canada, there's no reason for them. I mean, his reasoning is they're not doing enough at their border. I mean, what do you want Canada to be doing? I mean, what was the crazy number, right? He's saying, well, they're not doing enough. Fentanyl's coming in through our northern border now. What was it, like 0.5% of fentanyl coming into the U.S. was coming through the Canadian border. So it's items like that that just get on my nerves. Tariffs, though, are just not. They're not a good thing used in this way. I mean, it's hard to see that us coming out on top. I mean, tariffs are generally a lose-lose situation. If other countries renegotiate their own trade policies, I mean, it could really come down to 25% of the world's economy against the remaining 75%, and that's not something we want, believe me. So we'll see where it goes, but at this rate, we'll see. I mean, you even have some Republicans, which you rarely see coming out speaking out against them. I think Senator Rand Paul, came out against them, saying exactly what top economists have been saying. They're inflationary. They increase consumer prices. So we'll see where this goes. But I mean, he's been all over the place on these tariffs too, right? Pushing them a month and saying he's not implementing. So we'll see what happens. But tariffs, not a good thing in this way.
Gotcha. Yeah. So like something that I have, and I think people have spoke about this, but it just seems to me from my perspective that the point of the tariffs might be more of like a negotiation tactic, like a very grand, dramatic negotiation tactic that maybe the intent is not actually to install. Oh, looks like we lost Brett for a moment there.
I was going to try, but I was actually going to jump in with that thought, right?
Yeah, if you, I'll let you take that and run with it.
I do think a good amount of them are first of all, I agree with you. The 10% across the board is stupid. All it does is drive up consumer cost. It has no purpose. That's literally the dumbest thing. That's all for show for people that don't understand economics. But I do think in terms of like the countries like our allies you were talking about, absolutely, we shouldn't be screwing with our allies. I think he's going far too hard at Canada. But in terms of placing reciprocal tariffs on some of our allies over in Europe, we have kind of tried to sit down with them and be like, all right, like we need to move this and this, and we need more money here. And they're not very responsive to that. So he kind of said, like, we're doing this or you're getting this. And that brings them to the table on short notice, that's a business tactic. It's a shady one. It's maybe not the most ethical one, but it's a business tactic, and he comes from business. He's trying to put them on the spot and get a better deal out of them. And that's also kind of reading into his mind a little, so I can't say that for fact. That's my opinion on what he's doing. I should clarify there. My opinion would be that he's kind of trying to get them to the table on like short notice and be like, all right, well, no more tariffs then, right? And hopefully that's the outcome. That would be the best outcome, I think, across the board if we could eliminate their tariffs and our tariffs, and then there's just no tariffs between nations. That would be the best trade, obviously.
So your hypothesis is that the tariffs are not meant to last.
No, I don't think they're meant to last, but he can't say that if that's the plan.
Of course.
It's not like he can be like, well, we're only doing this to get you to the table, because then it's not a threat. It needs to be a real threat in terms of like, yeah, we'll do this, which I think he will. I don't think he would pull back on this.
Yeah, we're this far.
If it came down to it where they're like, well, we're not budging, I don't think he's budging either. Which, yeah, that hurts us in the end. Like, that does hurt consumer in the end. But these countries most likely don't want that either. So at the end of the day, I think that it's going to work out that way. How that affects us in the short term, that could be bad. But long term, the best outcome would be that, and it's what I think he's gunning for. So
Brett had said something that I want to come back to and see what you think about this. I think you kind of nodded in agreement when he said it. And it was that, so what I think most people who at least are, in favor of the tariffs or think that they could be effective, the perspective is, yes, it might hurt us in the short run, but it's going to bring business back to the United States. It's going to create jobs. And in the long run, it's going to be good for our economy. But it sounds like what Brett was saying was that it's not going to be good for the United States to bring manufacturing back to the United States. And you agree with that?
I don't think it's good for the United States. I think there's a couple issues there. One, most of our generation's college educated. If not most, a lot. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to get a lot of these kids to work in factories. I know me and Brett are both college educated. I know you are too, right, Richie?
Yeah.
You went to, I visited you up in college. I'm dumb.
Yeah. I went to school with Brett, actually.
Yeah. That's how you, I'm so dumb. I don't think any of us would necessarily go work in a factory building iPhones. Not saying there's anything wrong with that job, just not something we're going to go do because we went to college for specific jobs, and a lot of our generation did that.
Right.
Factory workers tend to be uneducated. It's a labor job. Those are great jobs. They pay well typically, but you're not, those ones probably wouldn't. But labor jobs tend to pay well in America because the people who do them aren't as common as they used to be. And it's a smaller industry now. If you bring those jobs back here, pay goes down, you don't have the workers for it, and you're not really creating jobs because at the end of the day, where are we going to get those workers? All the illegal immigration that happened over the last few years. Mm. And it somewhat offers a solution there, but it really doesn't, because like Brett was saying, now the consumer is still paying $10,000 for an iPhone because we can't pay that person $2 an hour. That it doesn't work that way. We'd still have to pay minimum wage. The lowest in the country is either $7.25 or $7.75, whatever it is. And that's pretty low.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's that low.
I know in Pennsylvania it's definitely $7.75.
I think it's 18 in New York, right?
It's in New York City, maybe, and in Long Island, Suffolk County, it wouldn't be any higher than 16.
Okay.
But still,
it's a big difference from 7.
Yeah, big difference. It's double, more than double actually. I think from $7.25 at least. But yeah, Pennsylvania is definitely $7.75 because that's so think living in Philadelphia, that's what some people are making, which is crazy. But Moving on from that, that's a whole nother discussion. But yeah, I don't think you have the workers for it. I think where you would get the workers would cause a lot of controversy. Not that I disagree with a lot of these people getting their citizenship. I think most people that are here and haven't committed a crime should get it. But I don't think that like that's the solution, bringing manufacturing back to create the jobs and filling it with formerly illegal immigrants. Like because that's really realistically the only way that can be executed. That I see at least.
So I have one, and I don't want to stay on tariffs for too long, but just one thing that I'm thinking of as you're saying that is the future of like AI and robotics and stuff like that. And I'm kind of just thinking of this now actually. Could it possibly be a play if there's going to be, say, in the next 5 to 10 years, a much more larger application of AI doing like more like labor tasks, like manufacturing and stuff like that, where you don't even really need jobs to be manufacturing? Is it possible that this is a push to bring that back so that we are reaping the benefits of that and not having AI building our things in China?
I hadn't thought of that, but that's honestly a really solid point. Like get at the forefront of that. Um, yeah, I would just agree with you. I haven't put any thought into that, but that's a great point. Um,
And if I could
I
jump
think
in on,
AI is sorry.
no, good. If I mean, still on the tariffs, we'll go to AI, but I think it's just important to note and remind people like why manufacturing left in the first place, typically in the
Mm.
United States, right? And when you start looking at global trade, it just opened up comparative advantage. Countries start specializing in what they're best at, and for us, that was shifting to more high value services, right? And technology and innovation, and that's what really pushed us ahead of everybody else. Um, and so I think that fixation on manufacturing is backwards for Trump, to be honest. But
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
that was really just my what a point I wanted to say.
Totally. Yeah, I don't know. I personally think a lot about what the future could look like in terms of like AI and other stuff. And I think for a lot of people it's a scary thought. This
Mhm.
idea that, like AI is gonna take everyone's jobs and stuff like that. I think it's hard to see something that's so different from what we have today. Like imagine telling someone from, you know, 5,000 years ago like the idea of a democracy and that all the people will have a say in government. They'd be like what are you talking about? There's no way everyone could be involved in that. The people are idiots. Um which I mean, probably is still true a lot of the time today, um but I just think that like if you think about like what the potential could be if it's handled properly and we're able to with AI free ourselves from like this idea of like toil where for all of humanity we have been tied to like this need to work to survive, and if there could be a future where we can remove that need and people can work on what they want to work on, or just have a little bit more like freedom to do what they want that isn't about I have to find a way to make money to put food on the table for my kids. Like I think there's a world where we could go in that direction, and I think that would be an incredible thing if we could get there. All right, so want to ask you quick, and I have a feeling that you guys are going to agree on this one. In the same way that I asked you about Elon Musk, what do you guys think of RFK?
I like RFK. I really can't see any issue with what he's done or how he's doing it. I don't
Um,
know what you think there, Brett.
I'm not a fan. Listen, I'm fine with him outside of the government. I hate him as the you know Secretary of Health and Human Services or whatever it is. I mean his back and forth on. I mean, I personally his whole back and forth on vaccines, etc., was just his way of getting into the government in the first place. His whole election process of telling siding with Trump. That's because Trump promised him a position as Department of the whole ploy with him is such a joke. I mean, the guy is a complete phony, to be honest, in my eyes.
Really, I'm surprised. I thought you guys would both like RFK.
Well, people think the Democrats would like him because he was a Democrat, right? And he's the JFK's or some related to JFK, but I mean, just him and his the way he goes back and forth on things. Just listen, there's things he says that make sense, and I agree with. Right? I think children in this country should be more healthy. I think but again, I just can't get past what he says on vaccines and the damage it can do. I can't get past on how he shifts his opinions on things in order to get power. He got it, it worked, but now you see, um, issues of him cutting the workforce at the Department of Health and Human Services, or um, and then you see what's currently happening, the measles outbreak going on in Texas, and he's kind of
Mhm.
downplaying it a little bit. No, that's a big deal going on. What's going on in Texas right now? I think I just read the second child died
Yep.
a couple days
I
ago.
just saw that right before
And
too.
he was talking on having an interview a month ago saying, well, we have measles outbreaks every year, right? This isn't really. No, it is. These have been the first deaths. I think in how many years since it's been eradicated
Mm.
because of vaccines. Um, and then I mean, it's only the amount of cases only increased, and it's probably way higher than what has been reported, because that's just the way it works, and it's very highly among the unvaccinated. And it doesn't help when you have him going back and forth saying, well, there's a lot of dangers to vaccines, and then, oh, well, then vaccines are the reason it was eradicated, and then that's not. It just doesn't seem like he knows which way to go about this thing, when there is easily that's could have been somebody who's just way more um, transparent, not such a power grabber, and somebody who has way more experience in terms of handling these situations, especially ones you see in Texas. That's the whole reason everybody was afraid of what was going to happen, because if we were to have another pandemic like when we were in college, COVID, or if we were to have a measles outbreak, like what is happening right now, you're not hearing much about it, but every now and then you'll see an article pop up: cases increase 200, second child dies. That's going to keep adding up. We
Mhm.
have to talk about these things. We can't not talk about them because it doesn't favor Republicans, right? It doesn't sound good when it's only among the unvaccinated. Um, no, how do we learn from it, and how do we stop it? How do we prevent it from happening again? So I think that's just the way to go about it. And I know I kind of shifted the talk a little bit, but RFK, there's things he says that I agree with. He just goes too much back and forth. I don't like him leading, being in the position he's in.
I,
Gotcha.
I'll I'll agree with Brett on the health side of RFK. I think RFK, when it comes to medicine and vaccine, is kind of for lack of a better term, dumb. He just says dumb things and it's harmful, 100%.
Yeah,
Now, I do think that sometimes we're a little bit too strict on vaccines in the country. For instance, like absolutely, we need measles vaccines, polio, etc. But I don't necessarily know how I feel about the HPV vaccine being mandatory. So, and my reason behind that is somebody has the option of practicing safe sex or not, or abstinence or not. Why should they be mandated to take a vaccine for something
It's
that they can
reasonable.
only get through sexual contact? And you do need that to go to certain colleges, or maybe all. I don't know exactly what it is, but like we had to get that for New York colleges. And I don't like, but I agree with Brett. Some of the things RFK says with vaccines, or most of what he says with vaccines, is very harmful. Um,
and the reason
what I
I
like about him in this position, sorry, this
yeah,
is the
sorry,
last thing
go
I'll
ahead.
say, is that he's. I want him to clean up the food industry, and so far, he's taking care of Red 40. He's been saying he has plans for other stuff. And that's the kind of things I want to see. Like Red 40, really quick, has that link to ADHD. I'll let Brett go, and then maybe we can circle back to that. But look into that. Red 40 has a link to ADHD, which is extremely interesting. And if that's eliminated, maybe we'll see a drop in it.
Hmm.
Sorry, Brett. What did you say?
Wait, so I just want to ask one thing real quick, just like for anyone listening. What is Red 40 exactly?
Red 40 is a dye. Oh, you wait, shy.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna ask, just so that people understand like what it is you were just
Okay.
talking about. Like, what exactly is that? Just like a
So
quick definition.
yeah, Red 40 is a dye that they use in foods because it's cheaper than using natural red food coloring. And it's essentially one of many dyes that should have been banned. Back in the 70s and 80s, they banned a ton of them because they had horrible effects on kids and adults alike. But Red 40 was the one they kept because it had the least negative effects, but it does have negative effects. It's just showing to be long term. we're thinking that is directly linked to ADHD in kids.
Interesting.
Because there's a significant rise in it, with red 40 being significantly put into foods. And it's found in a lot of foods, Swedish fish. Anything you eat that's red has red 40 in it. And medicine has it in it as well. The plan is, I think, I could have these numbers wrong, 2027, it needs to be out of food, and then 2028, it needs to be out of medicine, or reverse food and medicine.
Gotcha. All right, so Brett, what was your?
Yeah,
what did you want to respond?
I kind of lost it, but I think I was just gonna mention, like, the reason I look at JFK in terms of health is because the position he's in now, right? If you were to ask me before where he's at now, maybe I would have said something different, but this is what he has to be judged on now, right? Because
Sure.
the power he
Absolutely.
has is just, I mean, it's too important, as if you paid attention to his confirmation hearing, you know, his back and forth were really getting on the nerves of some of the senators, especially on the Democratic side. But it's too important to be playing around like he does, saying things like, you know, well, vaccines cause Alzheimer's or autism, or, I mean, and when there's really not much evidence that supports that. So
little to none. Like,
so yeah, none. So it's things like that, and then of course, I always laugh, and this is kind of random, but he was like selling the Bernie Sanders brought up like his merch, so, like, selling like the unvaccinated T-shirts, and you're just like, you don't sell these? He's like, no, I don't sell those anymore. But it was funny. It was funny.
So I want to. All right, two final questions on RFK. First of all, just to mention some of you that like you guys both just said that there's no link to autism. I have no knowledge on the link between vaccines and autism. But one statistic that I heard that I thought was like insane, if it's true, and I believe I did hear it from RFK, so maybe you might dispute this fact, period. But it was something along the lines of, I'm gonna mess up the exact numbers, but something along the lines of, like, if you go back to maybe like 1950, the autism rate was like, I don't know, something like one in like several thousand or something like that, and today it's 1 in 36.
yes.
Is that a true stat?
Quigley
So-
might know.
Yes and no. So this is something we talked about in school. I'm a teacher, for those listening, just so you know, like, why that I have this background. That's semi-true. If you can do this same study with other countries where they don't have as many vaccines, and they've proven that there's less autism in those countries. Now, the question I would have is that due to the vaccines, or is that due to lack of development? Meaning, how well is your teaching staff, how well are your parents at identifying an autistic child? Because in the United States, you know, you and I, someone here, one of the three of us could have autism,
Right.
and no one could know, because there's extremely high functioning autism that we diagnose because it is autism, but it's not a noticeable level of autism. That could have been glossed over in the 50s. Think about the kids our parents talk about having been in their classrooms, you know, and maybe somewhat offensively at times, but there was kids in the classrooms back then that didn't belong in regular classrooms. And I'm not specifically referencing just autistic kids there. I'm talking like kids with other, you know, learning disabilities that are more severe. That's something that was very common back then. Now, on the alternative side of that, playing devil's advocate, not necessarily saying I believe this, there's another argument that vaccines don't cause autism, but maybe catalyst it. Meaning, like, autism tends to show later in life, not later in life, and later in age. Like, a 2-year-old doesn't necessarily display signs of autism, but a 9-year-old, that same kid at 9 might start displaying the signs of autism, even though the first 5 years of school they didn't, right? And that's a thing that happens. One of the arguments is that vaccines catalyst it, the way that, like, certain drugs can catalyst schizophrenia when you get to college, right? Anyone remember the weed causes schizophrenia crap?
Yes, I have heard that.
So weed doesn't cause schizophrenia, neither does psychedelics like mushrooms or LSD or any of that. My college thesis actually was on LSD, and like how the government used it wrongfully and blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't cause schizophrenia. Nothing causes schizophrenia. It does catalyst the brain into thinking in the way schizophrenics do, because schizophrenia is just a difference in the way you think, same as autism. It's not a real mental illness. It's just a difference in the way your brain functions. So there's an argument that it could catalyst it. I don't necessarily disbelieve or believe that. I think there needs to be research done into that because that's highly possible. But there's no real evidence saying that's real. But that would be the two possibilities as to why that is, with the in terms of why there's more autism today than there was then, or more autism in the United States and Europe than there is in like Africa and maybe some Asian
I would
countries.
also say I would make the argument that there's a lot more that is also classified as autism now. I mean, autism is nowadays
Yes.
considered a spectrum, not just you're autistic
Sure.
or somebody's autistic. I mean, there's way more. I mean, there's Asperger's, right? There's a ton of different things that fall on the spectrum now. So you have to look at it that way too. And there's also ways on how people were. There's also a bunch of things that parents could have done while somebody was in the womb that could be playing a role.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
There's way more. I mean, and vaccines have been around for a while. And like I said, there's no data from what I have seen that supports the idea that vaccines cause autism. And the reason I say vaccines cause autism is that's the wording that was used.
Yes.
It wasn't like,
it's
well, we're going to look
ridiculous.
into it. We might see it as the words used words. Vaccines cause autism. So that's where the pushback comes from. That's where the frustration comes from I think Democrats and just anybody who is not a fan of RFK and cutting or defunding, the Health and Human Services or whatever
Right.
department in general.
So last thing on RFK, have you guys ever have you guys listened to whatever on podcasts or any sort of space where RFK really like elaborated on like his view when it comes to vaccines?
When he did the Joe Rogan one months ago, I listened.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's almost a year ago now, even.
Sure. Yeah, because like, first of all, it seems to me, and people have, I've been told that if you go back, like 10, 20 years ago, he was flat out saying like vaccines
Mm-hmm.
are bad, like you shouldn't be taking vaccines and stuff like that. He doesn't, seems to have dialed back on that today. He's a little bit more objective maybe and not really telling you what to do, but like just here's what I've seen. The biggest thing that I'm seeing from him is not that like vaccines are inherently bad, but that it's a problem that the pharmaceutical companies that are creating vaccines are not held responsible if there is some sort of danger associated. And I think something that's, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily true or not, but something that's important to be aware of is that two things can be true at the same time. Vaccines can serve their intended purpose and eradicate diseases and do things that are extremely necessary, but they also might be having adverse effects that the people who make them are not really motivated to address. Yeah, that's kind of my like 2 cents on like what I've heard when he elaborates. Like I kind of thought that he wasn't really saying anything too crazy, and maybe like some people might take that and run and say like vaccines are terrible and like you should never get a vaccine. But ultimately, I thought the point that he was making was one that was pretty reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, listen, there's a cause and effect to everything. I mean, everybody knows there's a chance you might have an allergic reaction to a vaccine,
Mm-hmm.
right? The parents know that when the doctor's like, "Well, here's the vaccines we plan on giving," or what's the usual, the parents know, hey, the baby might have a reaction, but
Mm-hmm.
you also won't have a situation where they get polio, or you won't have a situation where you choose not to vaccinate your children, and then 18 years down the road, or 10 years down the road, I should say, they come out with measles. And and then you have the first child to die because of measles since
Right.
whenever. And then you kind of realize, well, maybe I should have got them vaccinated because the chances of dying from measles as a kid are pretty high, even though you don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that kind of outweighs the possible effect maybe that the measles vaccine would have on you, to be honest, or your baby at the
Absolutely.
time. So it's one of those things. But listen, and I'm kind of on the side. If you don't want to get a vaccine, you don't have to get it. Um, do I agree with it? No. Do I think it'd be better if you did? Yeah. But listen, if you don't want to, do it and see what happens. And I know that's a kind of a blank stare in terms of opinions, but um, that's
I,
what I
I
think.
I think like I would like to see not just like, that it should be up to the person, the individual, if they want to get it or not. I would like to see more effort to, if there are problems with vaccines, to address those problems and have these companies be financially motivated to do so if they exist. I think first of all, I'm very skeptical of anything that's like you can't talk against it. Like it is
Mhm.
such a stigma against being anti-vax, for example. And to me, like anything that's like you're immediately going to get dirty looks from everybody if you even say, well, maybe there is this one bad thing about it. That to me is like, especially when it's coming from, like I was saying while when you were having issues earlier, Brett, that like I am somebody that I tend to see that there's a lot of corruption and like you know, big, powerful people that have an insane amount of power beyond what we could ever really imagine to push their agenda, whatever that is. Um, and so when I see that, where it's like there's this like societal movement that if you were to question the idea of vaccines, that you're a terrible person, that's like major red flags for me. Um, and like so, like something that I heard RFK say was that yeah, like it might very much be the case that certain people, for whatever like genetic reason or allergies that they might have, that those specific people might run into an issue with vaccines. But the problem is that if there's no effort to like recognize that there is these problems and we need to study them and we need to understand like who is going to be at risk so that we know these people should get this vaccine, these people should not. If we're just going to say no, vaccines are absolutely great and they're fine and there's nothing to worry about, and we ignore that, I think that's a terrible thing. So I think the important thing is to be able to recognize two things are both true. That there might be problems that need to be addressed, but we shouldn't just be saying like vaccines are bad. I think people are too easily like they want to fit to one side or the other and not acknowledge like, man, there's probably some truth on both sides here.
Yeah, I mean that's also I agree. That's also the way society has changed over the years, right? Especially with social media, right? I mean, you say anything on there that somebody disagrees with, you get attacked immediately. Um, so I think that's it's kind of become in the digital age
Yeah.
scenario where whatever you say is kind of used, against you. Especially if you say something now, it might get used against you 5 years from now. Um, so I agree, but I also think that's sort of Trump's favorite phrase, common sense, right? It's also kind of common sense. I would hope people um, realize that two things can be true at the same time, because I
Yeah.
completely agree, Rich. But I also feel that's a little bit. I hope people know that.
Yeah, I think people say that like I don't think anyone would say like no, that's not the case, but I think it doesn't tend to come off in practice.
Hmm.
People
It
tend
does.
to focus on
It
the thing
doesn't
that
occur.
they resonate more with and ignore the other truth on the other side. Sorry, quickly, what were you gonna say?
I was just saying, it doesn't occur to people like when they pick a camp that like they're not seeing the other side's view. That's something that school taught me a lot. Like in talking in an environment where you have to be like respectful to the other side. Like
Mm-hmm.
it taught me to really try to see the other perspective. And that also helps you with your own perspective, because if you know the other side's perspective, you understand their perspective, you can be like, well, no, I see where you're coming from. Like I wouldn't think differently if I was in your position. I think that's a lot of politics too, is people tend to align with what's best for them, and for certain people, different things are best for them.
Right.
I
Totally.
think that would also fall to vaccines, honestly, where some people like might have a genetic line of like issues with certain illnesses or something. Again, polio and measles and the big ones, I think, are so obviously we need to have those.
Mm-hmm.
So like somebody might look at like the HPV vaccine and be like, well, we're a strong Mormon family. There's never been an issue of STDs in our family. Why does my child need that at the risk of having another vaccine in their body? And like that's where I agree with we shouldn't be forcing it on people, and we should be taking accountability for when there's issues with vaccines.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay. I have, if you guys are okay for another like few minutes, I have like one more topic and then two like quick questions that we'll wrap up with. So the last topic I want to talk about is what do you think about the idea of free healthcare? So we'll start with Brett.
That's a tough one. I mean, I love it. I'm all for it, but it's not that simple. Um, I think it's a tough question. It's I think where we're at right now is a good spot. I know people feel that's not the case, but Obamacare has been good. The Affordable Care Act has been good. It's also a tough subject because one of my clients is in the healthcare industry, so I don't want to say too much.
Okay.
But yeah, but I, I think we're in a good spot. But um, free healthcare, it's I mean, there's a cost to everything in life. Um, so where does it come from, and how do we get that? You
Sure.
know what I mean? I think that would be my biggest question. Um, I mean, I think it would be beneficial, but it's not that simple.
And then my other question that always comes up, because I don't really know where I stand with this. I mean, I'm with you. Free healthcare sounds great. I'd love for it to, let's of course, let's get healthcare. The other issue that I have, or like concern, would be how does that affect the quality of healthcare that is available if we have that different sort of system. But quickly, what do you got?
So I was going to say, I was pretty much going to go to quality with that.
Okay.
Like you said, it's a great idea. I mean, I love the idea of not paying for my healthcare, but it's just unrealistic. It does work, and people reference it all the time in like Sweden or Norway, right? It works in countries like that. Why does it work? Because they're all the same tribe. Like when you're all the same tribe, it's a lot easier to make things work. It's a lot easier to make socialism in general work, and it's a much smaller scale.
Mm.
Don't have the same level of flow into the hospitals. You don't have these lines, all of that. It's not as big of an issue. In the United States, we have a population of 335 million legal citizens. And then I think the illegal count's somewhere between 15 and 20. I could have that totally wrong. So don't quote me on that. But so let's say
we got a lot of people.
Yeah, let's say 350 to 360 million ballparking in the country at a time, right? That's a lot of freaking people. And like the hospitals can't handle free healthcare for everybody, because if that were the case, you have everybody running to the ER for everything. And that's what we see with Medicare and Medicaid, right? Somebody with Medicare and Medicaid often just go to the ER instead of their physical care physician or primary care physician, or whatever other doctor they need, because it's easier and it's free. But we don't want that. I do think we have issues in our healthcare system that we need fixed. I don't think we have the worst healthcare system. Like Brett was saying, people complain about it horribly. It's not the worst in the world. But I mean, I'll use my parents as an example, who they both have great jobs, this and that. They make good money, but their deductibles are at like $7,000 per individual on the healthcare plan, because their boss chooses to pick crap plans that used to not even be available. And the reason these plans are available is because they're subsidizing the cheaper plans that Obamacare allows for people to buy. Now, I don't have an issue with the premise of Obamacare. I think that what we need to do is, because Obamacare would work fine if we did what I'm about to say next. We need to separate the insurance and the pharmaceutical companies so they're not setting their prices. A lot of the insurance and pharmaceutical companies are tied together, which means they're essentially buying from their own company, which allows them to set the price that they pay their own company, right? And that doesn't work. You can't have that happening, because that's just creating fake money out of nowhere. And that also allows them to now charge this crap out of hospitals, and that's what drives up our medical bills, which is what drives up my parents' deductibles over like our deductibles. So I'm not going to ask what we all pay in health insurance, but assuming we're not on government insurance, it's under probably like $200 to $300 a month, and we have probably no deductibles, $50 copays type of plans, right? That's crazy compared to what they're taking, like let's say $6,000 a year, and they're paying those crazy deductibles. That could be fixed by separating those companies and bringing down prices of actual like medical goods, because it doesn't cost what we say it costs. It costs that because we allow them to charge that.
Right.
So that would be my thing on healthcare, is there's a way to do it in a capitalistic sense that keep the socialized healthcare that we've put in place to make sure everybody is insured in a fair way, but not have, one class of people paying ridiculous amounts getting crap healthcare, while a lower class of people, or like lower financial class of people is getting phenomenal healthcare at no cost.
Do you feel like maybe the answer could be, and I'm just kind of like brainstorming this as I go here, but something along the lines of like removing private health insurance and having health insurance being like a government program where it's the basically like we're not making money off of health insurance. You're paying into your health insurance. You're not being denied claims. Like you're paying health insurance so that you can. So basically, the point is it's not free healthcare, but it's guaranteed healthcare.
That's essentially what Canada does, right? And like that's where you end up with the efficiency issue of running the country with all of that.
Okay.
You know, like I saw a thing recently. I again could be fake. It's on Instagram, but I don't think it was fake because this would be a pretty wild thing to put your face in and fake. It was a bald lady who has a brain tumor or so, or had a tumor in her chest, and now they believe she has a brain tumor and needs an MRI. So she went in December 2024 for her MRI appointment. They said we'll schedule it within the year. Her MRI appointment that she needs within a year is January 2026.
Wow.
And her appointment was December 2024.
Okay.
That's a product of having socialized healthcare because you end up with much, or I should say not just socialized, government-based healthcare where everybody is insured through the same place, through the federal government. You're going to end up with that issue. You could try it on a state level, but I would just tell you to go look at Mitt Romney tried it back when we were in middle school. Or maybe even elementary school. He tried it in Massachusetts, and it didn't go well. He essentially tried Obamacare, a very similar version of it, in Massachusetts prior to his presidential run.
I mean, this is going to sound like brain dead stupid, but like, what if we just had more doctors and more hospitals?
That would help.
More medical offices.
It would help. It would maybe make it more feasible. You need to get the people to actually be willing to go to school for that, though.
Right.
And if that were the case, I'd say you need to reduce the cost of medical education. Because I mean, what doctors pay for their education is freaking outrageous.
Yeah, for sure.
One of our buddies, I won't use his name here, but I don't know if you might know who I'm talking about, Richie. A kid who graduated 2 years before us is a dentist now. I can't even imagine what his student debt is.
Sure.
Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, so like this is where to like tie this back in with DOGE a little bit. I really believe in the overall principle of what DOGE is doing because ultimately, I feel like we're talking about things that basically could be really helpful and really important, but it comes down to who's going to pay for it. And my feeling is that like the money is there. Like we're spending so much money on so much stupid shit that we don't need to be spending money on, that I'd much rather be seeing, make college more affordable, make it easier for people to go into fields like this. Like, I think we're moving into a place where, like, education should be more accessible to people. Like, you shouldn't have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to go and learn about something that is going to allow you to contribute really positively to humanity. Like, I just on like a common sense, ethically, like what's best for humanity, we should make it easier for people to get themselves in positions to help humanity. And I think there's got to be enough stuff that we're spending money on that's less important than that. That like I'd love to see tax dollars redirect. And I'm not an economist. I'm not I don't know politics that well. Like maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but I feel like it's simple, but I feel like that kind of makes sense.
I can visualize the flow of money you're talking about. You're essentially saying take the money out of the privatized industry, move it into government-ran healthcare, and have the government pay the doctors, or have the government subsidize education for medical with that money, and have them pay the doctors, hopefully at a fair salary.
Yeah, which it is important that doctors would have to be in order if we're going to attract doctors, they got to be well paid.
Yes, but that's it. Doctors would definitely end up with reduced salaries from this because if you take out the privatization, you're taking out the capitalist sense of it, which is going to reduce price, which is the overall goal for the consumer. But you have to also think of the doctor as the business person in this scenario. Even though they're there to help you, they're also there to make their money.
Sure.
So I think a lot of doctors might end up pushing back on that. A lot of doctors who are, more so there to make money, whereas more of the holistic doctors who are there out of the genuine kindness of their heart, which is a lot of doctors, would be in favor of what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, and just to jump in, I know Rich, you kind of asked hypothetically, like why the government doesn't really, why is healthcare not run through the government? And I think there's somewhat an easy answer. It's not the whole answer, but part of it is, I mean, I think simply Americans don't really want it. And you might be like, well, what do you mean? But I mean, you have to think of what America is, right? And most Americans, I mean, typically conservatives, but they kind of, think of, individualism, right? And limited government. The government shouldn't have that much power.
Mm-hmm.
It should have a limited role in society. And if healthcare was to go to the government, I mean, is that too much? I mean, it's typically conservatives that kind of think that way. So
Sure.
that kind of clashes with that belief. So I would think you'd be surprised. I would think you'd be surprised to hear, but I think more people than not don't want that the government having that role.
I overall don't want government healthcare. What I really think is separation of pharmaceutical and insurance companies will essentially do the same thing we're talking about, reduce the prices to the point we need. But I think it's going to be 20 years before we see that happen. It's similar to the tobacco lobbyists. They owned Congress. Right now, healthcare owns Congress.
Right, exactly. I would say that my biggest issue with the connection between capitalism and healthcare, and I do think that the things I'm about to voice are largely fixed by everything that you guys are saying, as far as if we can like split some of these industries up and make them maybe compete with one another more than just like compete with the people. Ultimately, in capitalism, the goal is to maximize profit. And the reason why that works is because we have competition. Ultimately, the person who's able to provide the most effective, efficient product or service, like the price is going to regulate itself, because if somebody is able to do it for cheaper and just as good, people are going to buy from them. And like there seems to be a direct correlation between what's profitable and what is good for everybody, because the consumers are able to kind of like vote with their dollar. The issue with that in healthcare is that there's no room, like, if there is some sort of treatment that is free, maybe, for example, like maybe you just need to fix your diet or something along those lines, or, there's all types of things you hear about today, like holistic, random like things that you can take, or like mineral you can take or something like that, that actually fixes things that people might pay, hundreds, or insurance companies might pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to treat. Like there's no reason whatsoever right now for a doctor or a hospital or like the medical industry in general to prescribe that to somebody, because they're going to be losing out on an insane amount of money. And that's like my biggest issue with capitalism in regards to the healthcare industry, is that probably some of the best remedies that are out there are free, and for that reason we don't really know about them.
Right, Rich. That's capitalism. That's the
capitalism. It keeps an incentive to keep your people sick.
Yeah,
I think that's a lot of healthcare too. Like Ozempic, I think, is one of the craziest things. I'll use myself as an example. I have not touched Ozempic, but I put on a lot of weight. I mean, Brett, you saw me back in May to August. I was around 320, 330 pounds. I'm down to like 220 right now.
Yeah, good for you.
Yeah, thank you. But I didn't touch that shot. Like, that's just calorie cutting and like a little bit of exercise, not much because I'm lazy. But like, realistically, most people could do that. It's also changing your food, like, eat less Taco Bell and stuff. Most of us as Americans eat a lot of fast food. Even the food we buy at the grocery store, we're probably not buying ground beef. We're buying the frozen patties from the freezer, which at the end of the day are the same thing. Like, meaning same thing as fast food. Like, a lot of our health issues are somewhat caused by ourselves, but then they profit off of selling us things that don't really make us healthier. They just make us seem healthier, feel healthier. Like when you come off Ozempic, you put all the weight back on, so you're healthy while you're taking this drug. Like,
right.
That's definitely a product of capitalism in the healthcare industry. How we eliminate that, I'm not sure. I know RFK not to bring him back up, but he was talking about eliminating the commercials on TV. I don't know how you go about that or like what the actual legality is there constitutionally, whatever. But he was talking about doing that. I don't necessarily hate that idea. I think maybe restrict them, not eliminate them. But yeah, just a food for thought there, I
Right.
guess.
Brett, anything else on this?
No, I would just would say I think it's more about getting in the right habits, as uh, Quigley said. It's like once you stop taking this stuff, it comes right back, right? And
Yeah.
I think the push should be more towards what people have to do, and it is there. I mean, people know that exercise helps, cut weight, but it's not as easy for someone as it is for other people. And I think it's important to, offer people the knowledge they need to understand this is what maybe you should be doing at your level or at
Sure.
at your point. And that's what should be pushed more, because you want people to get into the habit or finding that habit of being healthy, and not just like giving them an alternative that works in the meantime, but it doesn't break them out of that habit, right? That's still there,
Totally.
So the habit they have is still there, and that's what really has to be addressed.
Gotcha. Yeah, 100%. All right. So, last thing I want to ask you guys, as we wrap up here, is obviously none of us are in any, we're not in government, we're not in any sort of place where like we really are having like a firsthand experience of this stuff. Most of what we're seeing is, yes, from our lives and the world around us, but a lot of what we're getting is from like what we read online, like the media we consume, the news that we get. And I think there's a really major component today in a lot of people's lives that like you don't really know who to trust. Like there's all these voices out there saying different things and this, and that. Who are some people that like if somebody's listening to this and maybe they want to learn a little bit more about like your perspective and like where you get your ideas from, who are some voices out there that you listen to that like you would recommend people to go and to learn more about the stuff that you believe?
That's tough.
That is a tough one. The way I'll answer that is, I would recommend getting a broad spectrum, hearing your news from a broad, getting it from a broad spectrum, right? Not just sticking to one platform.
Totally.
It's good to understand what people who don't agree with you are thinking and the way they feel. And the best explanation I could say is, get your news from Fox News sometimes, right? Or just read the same story in a different light. Get your news from CNN, the New York Times. Read all around on similar topics, because there's different arguments for everything. You see how other people kind of feel about things, and you see what their solutions might be. Yeah, I won't say like names and who people should listen to or who people should read. That's kind of the way I'll answer that question. I will say, media now has gotten really big into reporting on one way to look at.
Yeah, 100%.
And I don't like to bring up names or things of the past, but like you see issues like Fox News, what they had in the voting systems. They had to pay an $800 billion fine for pushing the narrative that they were rigged. Looking back at the 2020 election, I mean, Fox News's audience is ginormous, and I mean, I think that just settles it, right? They basically admitted to being, yeah, we did that. I mean, CNN recently, over the past, I think, had to pay a small settlement, which is like in our eyes, it's a lot, like $20 million or something like that, for something they said. And you don't really hear about that in the past, but it's some.
I think you're thinking of the MAGA hat kid.
Yeah,
they had to settle with him for like 20. I think it was 20 million. I could be they definitely settled with him, but it was a large amount because like they basically reported him as being a racist piece of crap. And when they showed the full video, it was literally just the kid standing there, like looking at someone, and it was like, oh, okay. So yeah, I remember that. But yeah, like, sorry.
I just say don't want to get too far off the path, right? But those are just examples of like media nowadays. It is really pushed towards a single view, and the best advice I would give is getting it from all avenues. Whether it's listening to different podcasts, or etc. Right? I think that's the most important thing.
So is there any, because like the reason that I asked this question is for say somebody is a Republican, but they listen to this and they want to do exactly what you're saying. Like, is there anybody that you'd recommend? Like, here's someone that I would check out that I tend to trust.
I would recommend. I think you have to be a New York Times subscriber. Ezra Klein is a good one. John Heilemann. They're left leaning. I mean, they're Democrats, but to get some of my perspective or things
cool.
you agree. Ezra Klein, John Heilemann, in politics. He's on the Apple. I think you could find him on Apple Podcasts.
Okay.
So those are the two guys I listen to.
Yeah, I mean, and this is like for me personally, like I'm always looking for people that I can listen to broaden, the information that I'm getting. How about you, Quigley?
I mean, really similar answer to Brett. Definitely diversify what you're watching. Like, if you're just watching Fox News or you're just watching MSNBC, CNN, you're living in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And I'd also watch different levels of media. So, like, mainstream media, obviously, like, is considered to be up at the top. That's what our parents watch. That's what even us watch to some extent. Like, that's where you're going to get, like, the baseline news. When you hear something on there, though, go listen to it on the other source. Then go down to like an independent journalist, like Brett's talking about in the New York Times, or like if you wanted to go with, because a lot, like I still read like you read, but a lot of people prefer to watch videos these days. You can go watch somebody for like a conservative perspective. Don't love them anymore. Like I used to like him a lot more when I was younger. That could just be that when I was younger I was more influenced. But Ben Shapiro's a decent conservative perspective. He's super, super hardcore on certain issues and it's kind of ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to cite anything specifically, but
I feel like we know what you're talking about.
Yeah. He's a very conservative perspective, though. That's a decent one to hear on a good amount of topics. I'm trying to think off the top of my head because I don't really watch a ton of stuff anymore because it just gets me angry most of the time.
Sure.
But I think the comedic stuff is honestly some of the better stuff to watch because they tend to be more honest. Like The Daily Show, not the biggest fan of it, but they tend to be a little more honest on there when they're talking. I think I think, like Brett said, just diversify, watch different levels, read and watch things,
Sure.
and you form your own opinion around that. So think of logically what is true of what the Republicans said and what's true of what the Democrats said, because that's the truth.
Totally.
Like they're both lying to exaggerate what's being done.
Gotcha. All right, cool, guys. I think we can call it a wrap there. Really appreciate you guys doing this. I think this is fun. I think it was a productive conversation for sure.
Before we leave,
yeah, this was awesome.
I also want to correct I think I said Fox settled for $800 billion. I think it was like 800 million. Not billion is an insane number.
Yeah, I was freaking military budget.
Yeah. Cool. Appreciate the on the fly fact check. But all right, guys. Thanks again. Have a good night.
Have a good one, guys.
Good talking to you guys. See you
later.
guys.